John Heilemann, what's amazing is to watch another sector of sort of civic society have to become psychological experts in Trump and Trumpism.
Yeah, like nothing we've ever really seen before. And I think, my gut is, and on the basis of the people that I talk to who work here in the city in finance, I think that the reaction is very much in the two things that you laid out, very much towards the reaction is, oh, he's not totally lost his mind. Which I think for some people, the flexibility, that's the way you put it. I put it as, people who.
I like your wording better.
I think there was this, when you came into Monday morning where he had gotten a lot of phone calls from donors, people who matter to him on the weekend and on Sunday night in particular, when Scott Bessent had gone down there was a kind of concerted push with Bessent and a lot of the donors who were calling him and saying, you have to find an off-ramp or you have to signal that there's an off-ramp on Monday morning, or we're going to be in another sea of red. This is going to be another bloodletting. And the fact that on Monday, the first thing he did on Monday the first two things they did, they put Peter Navarro on television to say no negotiating, there will be no deals. And then Trump's first tweet was, we're retaliating against China. And I think for a lot of people on Wall Street, their attitude was, they knew that there had been this push to get Trump to signal an off-ramp or to put a pause on. And the fact that that was the way they came out on Monday morning made a lot of people think he may have lost his mind. By which I mean, he just doesn't care. Doesn't care anymore about the markets, doesn't care anymore about consumer sentiment, doesn't care if he drives the country into a recession. He's trying to do this reset. It's this E-Day fix. It's what he wants to do, and we can't turn him around. And, as you know, that day then had all kinds of volatility. But I think today what you saw was people say, okay, there's still some sensitivity, and it's notable that it was a Goldman report on recession. Trump, is like a lot of people in New York City, where there are banks and there are banks. And there's a reason why Gary Cohn was the first National Economic Council chairman from Goldman. And the recession call by Goldman means more than the J.P. Morgan one. He thinks Jamie Dimon's a Democrat. He thinks a lot of things about other banks. I
was just looking at the time, 1 p.m. It comes out, 2:10 Trump tweets.
When Goldman makes the call, now that's not to say they weren't thinking about and talking about some of these things. You didn't just decide on the dime. But I think that's another trigger point. He's not a complicated person, Nicole, as you know. He's a mollusk, right? So it's like, when the water rushes in, or a certain person holds a flame next to the mollusk, it recoils or it rushes out. Goldman, recession, okay. That I don't think those two pieces of timing are unrelated. And I think that's what we saw here today. And the fact that this is how we're now doing global economic policy. I know we want to talk about China and will, but again, the fact that this is how we're doing it now, I mean, it's the 10th or 100th thing on my list of bonkers in the first 80 days, but bonkers.
And destabilizing. Jason, take us through sort of the twin headlines of what seems to be a growing unscientific consensus, at least at this table, around what the markets were responding to today, as well as Trump's turning the heat up, raising the tariffs against China at 125%.
Look, I care about the markets insofar as they're telling us something about the future and people are invested in them. But what I really care about is what happens to unemployment and inflation. And if you compare what President Trump originally announced on Liberation Day to where he is today, he's gone down on tariffs for 70 countries, but on China, he's gone up from 54% to 125%. That's our third most important trade partner. And so all in, where we are today is probably more inflationary than where we were at this time a week ago, even after the Liberation Day announcement. So I very much agree with Steve Liesman, went from 30 floggings down to 20. In some important respects, it might still be more like 30.
So what does that mean, 125% against China?
I mean, that means if you were going to import something for $100, now you need to pay $225 for it. There's an awful lot of stuff that's just not going to come over because people are going to think that tariff can't last. I'm going to outlast it. If you look 5 years in the future, it might mean some production migrates from China elsewhere. But it's just, most people who wanted a change in our economic relationship with China thought it had to be done gradually and carefully, not just this massive instantaneous shock.
Michael Crowley, the Times has some extraordinary reporting that broadens the conversation to represent sort of the full nature of the relationship between China and the United States. It involves the fate of people living in Taiwan. It involves the fate of the state of propaganda inside China. It involves the nature and the character of the Chinese people and their surging nationalism in the face of what is viewed as aggression from the American president. Just talk about how dicey the position is right now between the two countries, China and the United States.
Yeah, Nicole, our relationship with China is probably our most important relationship in the world. And we are framing everything right now, understandably, through trade and economics. But you have a whole basket of other issues, including security issues, to include whether China is going to make a move during this president's term to take over Taiwan, other issues that are really important having to do with the future of AI, climate change. Not that this president is particularly interested in that, but we have so many shared interests, and we have a very delicate, above all, I would say, security situation, which could escalate quickly to something very dangerous. And so in the midst of this market turmoil and global trade and economic turmoil, you have clear security implications that resonate in so many different areas. And the president has essentially fired a kind of a warning shot or even an opening salvo against China. You know, it's interesting because just in the last few weeks, Nicole, I had been having conversations with my colleagues who also cover foreign policy and national security, saying, isn't it interesting how little we're hearing about China? You know, during the campaign and over his career, President Trump has been kind of obsessed with China, and he has so many China hawks in his administration who say that China is the biggest threat to the United States. But there were virtually no policy pronouncements. And now here we go. We are in this conflict with China. And as you say, based in part on China's political culture, also the fragility of its economy, the Chinese are not going to back down by any sign that we've seen. They are Xi Jinping is going to stand up, show that he can't be cowed by President Trump. Nationalism is already starting to flare in that country, and you could get into an escalatory cycle that not only has these economic implications, but can have security implications that can become quite dangerous. So we went from China seeming to be on the back burner to now suddenly, you know, we're in the thick of it with China, not only economically, but in security terms. And again, the question is, can that escalation be controlled as you have two leaders who are going to have to show that they are tough and will not back down from one another? And that can be dangerous.
You reminded me about cyber at a moment when the scariest national security story the Times has reported in the last 48 hours is about U.S. abandoning all of our cyber protections.
Right. I was listening to you yesterday. I'm going to tie a bunch of things together here. You're going to love this. Okay. You were talking yesterday with John Brennan about that story. And it was interesting, and you asked the question to Brennan about whether there was a possibility that China could retaliate in a non-tariff way, in a military way, and he talked about the South China Sea and Taiwan. I immediately started thinking about the David Sanger story and Laura Loomer and all of that. Mm-hmm. And so I got Chris Krebs to come on my podcast, which will be out on Friday, and we talked about this just like literally an hour ago. And he was talking about Salt Typhoon. Now, this is a year ago, not even a year ago, last summer, when the Chinese did this giant cyber incursion into our telecommunication system. Mm-hmm. And in one of the most extraordinary cyber attacks in the history of cyber attacks. We still don't know what they have access to in government and the private sector, because they got so deep into the telecom systems. You know, your husband did a movie recently called Zero Day. As we were talking about this, me and Chris Krebs, he said, well, you know, my worry isn't Salt Typhoon, my worry is Volt Typhoon, which is the day that the Chinese decide to take down some key aspects, as in the movie, as in the series, starts to take down the power grid, start to take down the phones. I'm not predicting anything, and I want to. This is the worst thing you want to make predictions about. But there's no one in the realm of cyber right now who's not looking at this conflict and thinking that that's another place in which China could decide to retaliate that wouldn't be as provocative as a traditional military retaliation, but could be incredibly damaging to American companies and to American infrastructure, whether it's in the form of political infrastructure, elections infrastructure, all the stuff that we're letting our guard down on this whole other track that you've been talking about.
And that we're